Good afternoon, young scholars. I would like to welcome you to the Dead Poets Society. I hope you can join us soon. Mwahaha. My laugh is so sinister. You see, back in my day, I was what you flesh bags would call a big shot. I was a cleric, not of my own free will, a extremely successful poet, a lawyer, and a satirist. I'm considered one of the best metaphysical poets to grace the face of the earth with my feet. I was born in the year of our Lord 1572 and died in the year 1673. Despite my great talents and many professions, most of my life I lived poor and mooched off of my richer friends. What can I say? It was more fun. Most of my money went to womanizing and other worthwhile pursuits. I did have 12 children. Today I will be discussing a personal favorite of the many poems that I have written. It is entitled The Relic. To aid you lesser intelligences in grasping the vast concepts of my marvelous poetry, I will explicate it for you and point out a few major concepts. Our first step into the magical land of explication is to analyze the title. The conceit is right there. The relic, or the bracelet of my companion in this case, is the bracelet of my companion's hair, is the physical half of the conceit. The spiritual concept that it is supposed to represent is that of everlasting love. Are you still confused to what goes down during this poem? Let me break it down for you. So I'm laying there 6 feet under, all nice and cozy, with my lover's corpse. Very charming, I know. Along comes this crazy gravedigger who starts to unearth us from our eternal resting place. Apparently graves these days are like corner workers. When he finally gets down to see us, he sees a bracelet made from my companion's hair. What? You don't wear bracelets made of your lover's hair anymore? Alack, you kids just don't know how to party these days. Anyway, this bracelet was made as a token to guide us back to each other in the afterlife, even if only for a brief moment. The gravedigger, thinking we must be the remains of saints, plucks us out of the ground and sets us on our merry way to the king to be made into relics. The people think my lovely companion to be Mary Magdalene and I to be Jesus. I don't really mind this comparison. They then display us in a public place where all the men and lovely ladies come to adore us. They wouldn't know what my companion and I had done unless I had already written this poem to detail the miracles that we had wrought. She and I held a holy love, a spiritual sort of love not governed by the flesh, that kept us innocent as babes. We loved each other well while we were alive, but never really knew quite why. We had no physical desires towards each other, kissing only at meal times. While this pure holy love was such a miracle, nothing compared to the miracle of my sweet Mary, who is beyond words and comprehension. While I was alive, my poetry wasn't all fast carriages and attractive ladies. There was work involved too. I had to be aware of what I was putting into my poetry, where I was ending stanzas, the rhyme scheme, the hidden symbols, the theme. I could go on all night long. Let's go over some of the more obvious ones that I put into the relic. Let's see. I did use a lot of symbols, yes. For instance, the most obvious one that we already talked about would be the relic representing our holy love. The guardian angels in stanza 3, however, represent the degree of innocence in our relationship, which is to such an extreme level that only inhuman creatures could hold it. Oh, one more. The miracles sought in stanza 2 represent the need of mankind to, how would you say this? To have more than faith to base their lives upon. Oh, that brings us to the shift in the rhyme scheme. The end rhyme scheme of the first 2 stanzas is identical, only drastically changing in the third, demonstrating a large shift of the focus of the poem and the tone, to be discussed later. The first two stanzas flow into one another as a natural chain of thought. The first stanza has an overall tone of consternation. I didn't want to be removed from my rest with my lover, and the gravedigger did just the opposite of what I thought that he should have done. But the tone then shifts to one of ribbing. I'm all right with us moving on from our rest now. It has great perks, sainthoods, messes of fans. You get my point. I'm still allowed to harmlessly tease a little bit, though, in this part of the poem. However, the largest tonal shift comes in the third stanza, when I bring the mood down to one of reverence. I could play all I wanted to with the mistake of the gravedigger in the second stanza, but the miracles of our holy love are not something to be toyed with. When I wrote this piece, I did so with many themes in mind. One particular theme that you may have noticed is the idea that to love innocently and spiritually, free from desires of the flesh, is a miracle in itself and exalts one to the level of a saint. This is the purpose that I had in mind when I wrote this poem, and I hope that it was able to be conveyed to you clearly. Why did I write this poem? Well, let's just say it had to do more with who I wrote this poem to. You see, in my time it was perfectly appropriate for a man to be in love with a married woman, so long as it was a platonic love. But we all know how that really goes. Her name was Miss Magdalene, and she was a good friend as well of one of my numerous benefactors. Alas, I was merely allowed to admire her from a distance. She had a fine bustle. So I wrote this poem as a gift, and to emphasize the only form of love that I was allowed to have for her, and her bustle. Have you ever noticed that if you circle the pronouns in a poem, it becomes a little like a key to a map? You can discover what is really going on in the poem, and who it is referring to at all times. It simplifies everything a bit, and brings you back to the bare bones of what I intended this poem to be. In this poem, I used a lot of pronouns to enforce the idea that the plot was about my lover and myself, and that outside forces could not be used to sway us away from our morals and previously declared standards. I separated my companion from myself in the last lines to show that while she and I are together, she is beyond myself and therefore beyond comprehension. I also used the separation of the gravedigger from ourselves in the very beginning to emphasize the previously stated idea, although he did have some effect upon the situation now that I think about it. Sweet King Charles I, I am tired. All this explication has worn me quite thin. I do believe it is time for me to retire to my sepulchre in St. Paul's Cathedral. Until next time on the Dead Poets Society, I bid you farewell.